I'm delighted to be joined by Nathan Law, who is a former chairman of the Demosisto Party, which he co-founded, of course, and he's one of the most prominent faces of the Hong Kong opposition. He has fled Hong Kong since the new security law came into effect June 30th. Nathan, good to have you with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
First and foremost, how are you? How are you doing?
Well, I'm still settling, and it's difficult because fleeing is not something you could plan ahead. So I've been really getting used to life here and how I could really make it work, that I could contribute to the movement while I'm outside.
Indeed. Your life, of course, turned upside down when the new security law came into effect a couple of months ago, and you had to flee Hong Kong. You're trying to continue to promote the advocacy work from abroad now instead of from within Hong Kong. How is that working out?
Well, I think it has been doing well because I think it is also important for the movement that we have an international front, that we can get as much attention as we can, and then to garner the international support in order to pressure the Chinese government. At the end of the day, it takes a lot of effort locally and also internationally to really get China to change its very heavy-handed approach. So for me, getting the support from the political scene in other countries, especially in the US, in UK, and Europe, is also extremely important for the movement.
And the movement is still alive then. You are obviously outside of Hong Kong right now, but Joshua Wong, as I understand, is still within Hong Kong, but the movement and its aims and its activities are still alive nonetheless.
Well, yes, of course. It's just because of the COVID pandemic and also the national security law. The people now, they are unable to demonstrate as vocally as we have seen for the past year, but they are still really angry about the government, and there are still a lot of potential of future protests. So for now, like the responsibility of like communicating to the international community and broadcasting Hong Kong people's demands, well, much of the responsibility shift to the people overseas like me. So I have to sustain that movement by really be the voice of Hong Kong.
And the new security law gives Beijing de facto jurisdiction now in national security cases in Hong Kong, and in essence is undermining Hong Kong common law. Did you think that the international community properly and sufficiently understands what's going on in Hong Kong these days?
Well, yes, I think since the movement last year, there has been massive interest in Hong Kong, and understanding on the Hong Kong issue has been gradually increased in the other countries. So I think most of the key stakeholders in the international politics really understand what's happening in Hong Kong and monitoring it very closely. When I paid a visit to Rome and to Berlin for the past 2 weeks, because the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was also paying a European visit, and I was there to like counter his presence. The officials and the opposition there, they showed a huge interest in Hong Kong issue and a high level of understanding. So I think this has become a heated topic in terms of international politics. And I think this is good for Hong Kong because we can get much more attention, then we may garner more support.
Obviously, you and your fellow Demosisto colleagues are opposing further increased influence on the part of Beijing in Hong Kong. What is your main goal here? What is the main objective of Demosisto?
In 1997, when Hong Kong was handed back from the British government to Chinese government, the Chinese government promised Hong Kong people that we will enjoy autonomy and freedom. So for now, there is no sight that we will have democracy or more sufficient freedom, and also our autonomy has been eroded, and Beijing keeps intervening the internal affairs that supposedly Hong Kong people decide. So for now, we're fighting for democracy and autonomy, things that Beijing had promised and we deserve. And I think this is well recognized by the international community, and most of the democracies are in support of that.
And you're, of course, not just fighting any country, you're fighting China. It's one of the most powerful nations in the world. From the outset, it seems somewhat of an uneven fight here. A couple of very determined young people such as yourself against one of the most powerful nations in the world. How hopeful are you that you can meet your objectives?
Undoubtedly, this is a David versus Goliath battle, extremely uphill battle. And for a lot of Hong Kong people, we are not blindly optimistic about the future. We understand that China is probably the largest authoritarian regime throughout human history. So it is not it's not an easy fight. But for us, we are determined, and we understand that no matter how long it takes, we will still continue. And for me, as long as Hong Kong is under such autocratic regime, I'm unable to return. But I'm hopeful that in future, maybe it takes decades, that I could still go back to Hong Kong when it's democratic and free. So for us, we have a preparation, a mental preparation for a very, very long fight.
Indeed, you seem to be in it for the long haul. When I spoke to internationally acclaimed Chinese artist and activist Ai Weiwei a few months ago, he told me that in essence, the new security law is the final nail in the coffin for Hong Kong, and this is the end of Hong Kong as we know it. Would you agree with him?
Well, it is obviously the end of one country, two system. Hong Kong is no longer the ones that we used to know. But for us, like there are also values that are being preserved not by the government but by the people. We are still resisting the erosion of our rule of law, of our freedom, and our open society. And these things are the things that Beijing determined to destroy, and the civic society are united to have a resistance. So for me, it's obvious that the governing structure is no longer in place that protects Hong Kong people's freedom. But for us, the Hong Kong spirit in our hearts still continues, and we still fight for the better Hong Kong.
You're saying this is the de facto end of the one country, two system, and that Hong Kong is no longer semi-autonomous. To change this, what would it take to change this? Clearly, you are at the forefront of this battle and the struggle with your Demosisto colleagues, but what about international pressure?
Well, I think in order to change it, China has to understand that the way it deals with Hong Kong, not only deteriorating Hong Kong people's interest and rights, but also it hurts itself. It will trigger a lot of international setbacks and a lot of international sanctions. And China has to understand that the weight of this move like diplomacy is not working. Is basically destroying the foundation that these previous leaders have established, and Xi Jinping has to take full responsibility of why China is being surrounded by a lot of critical countries and a lot of fronts that make them uneasy. So for me, yes, increasing the scrutiny of the international community towards China, getting them to understand that we're no longer in a way to deal with China with appeasement and engagement strategy. Rather, we need to take actions, and a more proactive approach would definitely helping the cause of Hong Kong and helping not only for Hong Kong people, but all those like Xinjiang, concentration camp, the ones being locked in the concentration camp, and the other people in mainland China that are under gross human rights violations.
Are you concerned that some countries might not be willing to seek political confrontation with China in order not to endanger economic cooperation with Beijing? Is that in the realpolitik frames of this debate. Is that something that concerns you?
Yes, of course. That's how China wants to really use monetary interest to basically silence the other countries on its human rights violation. But for me, I think the tides has been changing. We used to say that, maybe there are lots of, like, for example, European countries are also submitted to that kind of lucrative offer from China, and they dare not to speak up. But I think there are already more and more criticism on the stance of these interactions. And at least from my point of view, from my observation for the past few weeks, there has been a drastic changes in terms of how European countries like Germany should deal with China, and it turns to a more value-based diplomacy and more critical and assertive stance towards China. So I think, yes, indeed, China has its economic power, but I think more and more countries realize that it is not gonna make them silent about China's human rights violations.
So you are seeing, and you are hopeful for a more value-based foreign policy on the part of other countries and Europe in particular?
Yes, of course, given that the economic power of China will decline undoubtedly. And well, for the domestic politics, more and more countries, the people in these countries, more and more of them having a more negative opinion towards China because of COVID, because of Hong Kong's incident, because of Xinjiang's incident. And it indeed reflects back to the stance of the government, because they are democratically elected and they have to be responsible to their voters. So we could see these like all-rounded changes from bottom up. And I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that in the future there will only be more and more Western democracies try to hold China accountable and being proactive towards their gross human rights violations.
This interview will be broadcast in the context of one of the largest international media conferences, M100, Sanssouci colloquium, which takes place annually in Potsdam. Let's talk about the role of the media and the role of journalists here for a second. Are journalists still able to do their jobs, to report from Hong Kong these days?
Well, to be honest, under the national security law, it is getting much more difficult for international journalists to cover there. There are already several foreign reporters, their visas are denied. And I think the way that Hong Kong government deals with this international press will gradually align with China, that they will have huge surveillance and screening on the qualification and also the background of the reporters, and the more critical that you report about China and Hong Kong, the less likely that you could be granted a working permit or working visa. So and also, like, if you are covering on the ground in the protest site, the police force has been really doing a lot of even brutalities towards reporters that make them hurt or make them suffer and make them difficult to do their duty. I think this is also a worrying signal for a lot of reporters that I know.
So you're saying press freedom these days in Hong Kong is increasingly curtailed and limited?
Well, of course, press is a very powerful way of holding the government accountable by reviewing their wrongdoings and asking them to respond to a lot of criticism. So I think the general direction for the Hong Kong government will definitely to curtail this freedom and to make their authority unchallenged.
Are you content with how the international media, how international journalists so far have been covering the situation on the ground in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong is a huge base for a lot of international media. A lot of the Asian headquarters of these international media are based in Hong Kong. Even though I know that some of them are considering moving under the national security law, but still, we still got a large group of very professional reporters based in Hong Kong. So I think for the past year, the coverage in Hong Kong has been massive. and has been very on point and very professional. So this is something that as a Hong Konger, that I would like to thank all those reporters who have been risking a lot of their safety to be here in Hong Kong to report for us, and it helps us to broadcast our cause and to let the world hear Hong Kong. So of course, that's something that I'm really thankful, and a lot of Hong Kong people are also appreciating the effort.
And lastly, you are obviously operating outside of Hong Kong right now. You're trying to promote the cause for more freedom within Hong Kong from outside. What would happen to you if you returned now? What do you think theoretically? Could you even return if you wanted to?
According to the state media, I'm now a wanted fugitive under the national security law. So if I return, then I'll definitely be arrested, be charged, and be locked in jail for years or even lifetime. So it's unlikely that I can return. And the reason why they wanted to arrest me under the national security law is just because I said that the international community should hold China accountable, should really react to its human rights violation. And it's definitely an example of how arbitrary the law is. And the government will definitely abuse it to be a legal weapon to prosecute political dissidents in Hong Kong.
Joshua Wong is quoted as saying that he is actually expecting imminent arrest, that he is expecting to be arrested fairly soon. What do you know about that? How is the situation on the ground right now?
Well, the government has been arresting prominent activists like Agnes Chow and also Jimmy Lai. And we suspect that it's only a matter of time that they will arrest Joshua, even though Joshua has done nothing. It's just a political prosecution. So he is indeed in grave danger, but it is very unlikely that he could leave Hong Kong because his passport is being confiscated. That's also a strategy for the government to limit his influence. So for me, I'm really worried. He's my closest colleague, and we've been fighting for democracy for years. So I will continue to monitor the situation, even though, well, to be honest, regarding to his condition, the things that I could do are very limited.
Yeah, but you still find ways and means to keep in touch with Joshua Wong and all your other colleagues from Demosisto, I assume.
Well, as Demosisto is already disbanded, and for the sake for them and also actually my families, I stopped contacting them because, well, it is easy for the government to fabricate or to cook up cases and to accuse them of colluding with me, which I'm doing international advocacy work overseas. So I don't want them to be endangered because of my activism. So I have not been contacting them since I left Hong Kong.
Nathan, before we let you go, how do you think this is going to play out? Obviously, you said it yourself, this is a David versus Goliath situation. What would be, from your point of view, what would be the realistic best case scenario that you can achieve?
Well, there will be a long period of that time for Hong Kong. We'll suffer from a lot of autocracy and a lot of suppression from the Beijing government. But on the other hand, we could also see that there are lots of Hong Kong people bravely resisting on the ground and keep their faith, even though it is extremely difficult to do so. So I think that that will be a long-term resistance, and the international community will also keep an eye on Hong Kong, keep an eye on China, and we need much more domestic and international pressure to change China's policy. So I hope that we are heading to that direction.
And the international media, as you said before, is playing its part to make sure that this issue is staying on the agenda. Nathan Law, thank you so much for your time. We wish you all the best, of course. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to be in touch before too long.
Thank you.
All the best.